Welcome to the Darkstream. Vox Day, voxday.blogspot.com. And tonight we're going to talk about the dumbing down of humanity. Now, some of you were postulating that I was specifically addressing some of the dumb arguments and dumb things that people said in response to my critique of an argument for free speech. That actually wasn't the inspiration, but just because some of you did express interest in hearing me critique additional cases that are made for free speech, I am going to add another one. In fact, I'm going to address one that is actually cited as one of the primary landmarks of the development of the concept of free speech. So we'll get there. So welcome to the Dread Ilk. Welcome to the VFM, to the Reprehensibles, and of course, to the Bears. Good to see you all. I have to admit, I am feeling pretty good tonight. This guy's, I'm very tempted to ban this guy who just said, Alt Hero 6 had too many references to yourself, your publishing company, and Gamergate. That's what I have to say to you. Okay. This is something, that whole project is a crowd-funded project. It's actually less referential. There's less quote-unquote fan service in Alt Hero and Chuck Dixon's Avalon than there is in the average Marvel or DC comic. And so if you were even following along the development of the process, then you would realize how we actually kept that to a minimum. We've had the design for that whole Dark Lord and Space Bunny design was something that was designed before the first comic existed. That was something that the people who supported the project, and maybe you're one of them. That's the only reason that I'm not banning you, is because it's because you have it and you've read it. There's a decent chance that you're one of the backers. And so, your opinion is fine, but the fact that we went 6 issues before any of that stuff contradicts the point that you're saying. And so, anyhow, if you don't like it, fine. But if you don't like that, then you're not going to like some of the future issues, because that's part of the whole tale. And not only that, but people who are not familiar with this stuff don't know a thing about it. They don't know a thing about it, and it doesn't detract from the story in the slightest. In fact, people are going to love the story. I guarantee you, they're going to love the story of that. Yep, see, I was correct. And that's why you're not getting banned, because you obviously were one of the backers. We're working on all this stuff. We're working on the Rebel statue. We're working on, I've had people complaining that they haven't gotten a paperback omnibus yet for 3 issues now. So I'm aware that not all of you who supported it understand the process that is involved. You understand that people can't believe that we've produced as much as we have in the time that we have with the resources that we have. They literally can't believe it. And so, I know it's frustrating that these things take time, but they do. Somebody was actually complaining a bit about the Alt Hero novel. They're saying, and I backed for an Alt Hero novel. I'm literally doing the final edit on it right now. So, but and I don't know if this is necessarily relevant to the topic, but it's interesting the comments that you get when you're doing this stuff. I was thinking about this the other day. Somebody made some comment the other day that they got banned for, and they were called. They were saying something about who is this chubby incel. I mean, I've been married for decades, not decades. All right, and not only that, but I would very much like to see somebody who is making comments about my physical fitness or whatever to come and try to do pull-ups with me. Okay? And that's why I was in a good mood, because for some time I couldn't do, I haven't been able to do pull-ups for like 8 years. I had some sort of weird bicep issue. And so it was really interesting to see an article talking about muscle memory. Scientists finally figured out that muscle memory exists. And it's absolutely true, because I haven't done any pull-ups in 8 years. And I'm not talking about, the easy front curl. I'm talking about the more difficult behind the head ones. And yes, I know all about the shoulder thing and whatnot. But they're more difficult to do. They're just much more difficult to do. I can probably do 10 more of the front-facing ones or the curl ones. But what was interesting was that I was super excited 2.5 weeks ago, because I was actually able to do a pull-up for the first time. And I think I did like 2, And, I mean, actually, no, I did 4, but that was all I could do. I couldn't do any more. And so what was interesting is that I switched, I just did it once a week. And I was super stoked because yesterday I was able to do 2 sets of 10, followed by a set of 7, followed by a set of 5. And so I was just kind of laughing when somebody made that comment, because if you know anything about doing pull-ups and stuff, then you realize that it's not easy to do 2 sets of 10 pull-ups in a row. Now, that's not massively impressive. I used to do like 17, 15, 12, I think was what the top of my workout was. But the point is that people just say this crap. They just come up with this nonsense. And it's just astonishing that we're expected to put up with this crap. And I mean, one of the biggest arguments against free speech is having to listen to what people produce. It's just absolutely nonsense, absolutely dishonest. And so hang on, let me see here. Duralex, Sedlex, they paid me a lot of money. That entire scene was comedy gold. Yeah, actually, we'll get to that in a second. Anyhow, since we're talking about it, I might as well let you see it here. So this is weighted pull-ups. Actually, I used to do weighted pull-ups with 45 pounds, but that's the most I ever did. So let's go to Alt Hero number 6. And this is a little introduction of what we are doing. So this is Alt Hero number 6, the new issue. It just came out today. You can find the link below. And so Cliff Cosmic did the art. The Dark Hunt is the title. I wrote the story on this one. Chuck Dixon, the legend, writes the Avalon. So, this is the Global Justice Initiative in their headquarters in Brussels, Belgium. Captain Europa was beat up a little bit in number 4. And so they're just getting together again after that disastrous episode. Redshift got pretty beat up previously. And there's Rainbow, the ever glamorous, ever fabulous Rainbow. And Captain Europa is not very happy with him. Now, this is what Duralex Sedlex was referring to. Dynamique is not supposed to be posing on the cover of fashion magazines. We've got other comics out. This one just came out in print. Chuck Dixon's Avalon, number 3, The Conscience of the King, set in the same world. And then this is Alt Hero Q number 1, which is going to be coming out very soon. And this is the aforementioned novel. This is Alt Hero Covert, and it's written by John Delarose. And we're excited to have this coming out soon. So these are all, it's kind of funny. I'm very amused when people try to like go literary snob on me and like, comic books are dumb. I don't like comic books and stuff. Okay, you realize you're watching a video, okay? I guarantee you're not a bigger literary snob than I am. Guaranteed. Okay? My favorite authors are Umberto Eco, Hermann Hesse, and Haruki Murakami. Those are my fun pleasure authors. When I want to read something more difficult, more challenging, then I read things like, Aristotle, Aquinas, history, etc., etc. So there's absolutely no need to try to impress me with the fact that you think comic books are insufficiently serious. The thing that's really interesting about comics is that that's how you get movies made. See, what comics are seeds of movies. And it's really interesting to see that they are, to see the way that they are very popular with people who make movies. And it's really kind of fascinating because we had published over 100 books and nobody cared. We'll get rid of Trash Dove here. Yes, I've read City of God. What they are is essentially storyboards. And I was talking to a producer about this because I was just really puzzled as to why there had been no interest, or very limited interest, I should say, in the books we were publishing. And then suddenly, we produced 3 comics, and then suddenly we've got multiple film production companies getting in touch with us. And that's why. Because comics are functionally storyboards. And so we're doing comics for exactly the same reason that I'm doing this Darkstream. It took my readers over 3 years to convince me to do these videos. Yes, I love Lovecraft. H.P. Lovecraft is fantastic. And so if you're going to get involved in the culture war, you have to go where the people are. Yes, I've read all of Machiavelli's stuff, not just the Art of War and The Prince. Fencing Bear says comics are a challenging genre using both text and image. Read Scott McCloud, Understanding Comics. What's really interesting about comics is that there's so many moving pieces that there's a lot of ways for things to go wrong. It's incredibly frustrating. When we're working on a book, it's much easier. It's much, much easier. And so when we started doing comics, what we realized was that it was really tough to work with both the illustrators and the colorists. I mean, it's really amazing. I'll give you an example of how insane the industry is. So I was talking to the letterist, or letterer, I think they're called, of one of our comics about 2 issues ago. And I said, how is it possible that we are getting typos? Where are these typos coming from? I'm sending you the script. I know the words are spelled correctly. And he said, well, I have to type them in. So I sometimes make a mistake when I'm typing it in. And I'm thinking, well, why would you do that? Why don't you just copy and paste it? And he said, well, because with the way that the software works, it has to be lowercase, and you guys always send me uppercase. Well, the reason all the writers that do comics do uppercase is because that's how the comics appear when they're produced. So when they write it in uppercase. But the software actually requires it in lowercase. So, I obviously started sending him everything in lowercase. And he called me up and said, this kind of messes me up. It kind of screws me up that I don't have to type it in. I was like, well, wait, I'm making your job easier, so this is a problem? He said, well, all the other writers that I work with, they still send it to me in the wrong format, so I'm used to typing stuff in. So whenever I get stuff, I just naturally start automatically typing it in. He said, don't worry, I'll adjust. But that's an indication of one of the many ways that humanity is getting dumbed down. This is totally inefficient. It's ridiculous. All anybody has to do, every writer has to do is, go into their Word Word processor, assign one of their hotkeys to make everything lowercase, and boom, that's it. I have 2 hotkeys now. So one, now that I'm writing comics, and one makes everything uppercase. The other thing makes everything lowercase. It's really, really simple. That's all it takes. And it eliminates typos. But they haven't figured this out. I mean, most of the people doing comics don't do it that way. It's just crazy. So, dumbing down. One of the things that I noticed when I was writing Cuckservative, and we address this, is the way that immigration has to dumb down almost any destination country. The destination countries tend to be more intelligent on average. The median IQs are higher. Why is this the case? Because people want to live in nicer places, and when you have a higher average IQ, you tend to have nicer, more functional societies. And so it's one of the a number of folks have done a study on this, and they did they've figured out that the single most important determinant of what a society is like is its average intelligence. It's not based on the geniuses. It's not based on the smartest people. It's based on the overall level. Why? Because most functionality has to be implemented by people who are everyday workers. And so when you are talking to people who are just performing everyday functions, they need to be able to do it. They need to be able to measure the electricity. They need to be able to fix the dryers. They need to be able to assist each others in the functioning of the different tasks that the division of labor has assigned them to. And so when you lower that average IQ, you lower the ability to function. And so if you simply check out the changing demographics of American IQ, if you just look at the average IQs of the countries where these people are coming from, you can see that since 1950, the average IQ of the United States has dropped at least 5 points on that basis alone. And that's compounded by two other factors. The other factor is we have set up, since 1950, we have set up a system that doubles the number of women in the workforce, and most of them are young women that would have been wives and mothers. Now, instead of that, they are going into higher education, they are going into the workplace, they're having fewer children, they're less likely to get married, and they are also, they're also less likely to have children at all. And the more that a woman is educated, the more intelligent she is, the less likely she is to have any children at all. So what we have set up is the exact opposite of eugenics. We've literally set up a dysgenic society. I would go so far to say that it is actually a discivilizational society. And this is a complete disaster. This is what they were talking about in the movie Idiocracy. So there is nothing more damaging to a society than a woman who goes off to university, gets a degree, gets a job, doesn't get married, doesn't have kids. That is always going to tend to lower the average IQ of society. And then there's a third factor, and this is really interesting. This is one that Bruce Carlton worked out. Bruce Carlton is a very intelligent English gentleman, and it's really, I recommend his blog. It's a little bit esoteric, but I think that if you enjoy this Darkstream, there's a very good chance that you'll enjoy reading his blog as well. And what he pointed out is that as we get older, our IQ tends to drop. So at 50, there's a reasonable chance that my IQ is not as high as it was when it was measured at, when I was a kid or when I was 18 and so forth. And so the older that the population is, the lower its average IQ is going to be as well. So if you look at a population, the U.S. population in 1950, the average age was younger than the average population in 2019. And so you've got three factors, at least three factors, that are all contributing to lower IQs, lower average IQs, which means that the society as a whole is less capable of functioning. And we're already seeing that. We're already seeing the breakdown of infrastructure, the inability to maintain the infrastructure. We're seeing science become increasingly incapable. We're seeing the convergence of institutions so that they're less and less able to perform their primary function. And so, if you put those three factors together, then the United States is probably, on average, about 10 IQ points below what it was in 1950. Of course, Owen Benjamin tells us that we've never been to the moon, so that's not a good explanation. We can't go back to somewhere we never went. But normally what you would say is that's why we can't go to the moon again. Thinker Bear says, I've heard a counter argument that emotional intelligence is more important to a society than IQ. Your thoughts? It doesn't smell right to me. That's ridiculous. There's no such thing as emotional intelligence. And so it's not a alternate form of intelligence. And even if it was, it's not more important than the ability to function at a high level with regards to abstract thought. It's not important. It's not as important as, faster cognitive capacity. So, it's just, it does. Let's see. Hombre's got no name. Voxy once said high IQ women tend to be crazy. Why is that? Because they have so few people that they can communicate effectively with. Women need an amount of social interaction, and they can't get it. They can't get it from their intellectual peers among the men because we're men. They can't get it from the women because what interests them doesn't interest the other women. And so it's... Fox Wolf Bear says, I was reading a post from the Chans that said the Roman Empire fell in a similar manner. Let women vote and they eventually destroy a nation. It wasn't women voting that was the problem in Rome. The elections in Rome were strictly limited and were based on the tribes. And so the problem there was just more the moral degeneracy and the fact that they welcomed so many foreigners in. So many foreigners were drawn to the wealth and power of the capital, and eventually they stopped. It stopped being Roman. What destroys a society is its lack of morality, its abandonment of its cultural traditions. And so that's usually what destroys a society. Obviously, it's entirely possible that, just getting invaded and, if the Mongols show up and wipe out a society, then, it doesn't have anything to do with your moral degeneracy. But anyhow, I don't even know who Destiny is. You are banned. It's really remarkable. Speaking of emotional intelligence, how stupid, how emotionally incontinent, and how cognitively challenged you have to be to come on to somebody's stream and say, you have to do what I want you to do or you're a coward. That's ridiculous. That's absolutely ridiculous. I don't buy into the lead poisoning issue at all. It probably didn't help anything, but it doesn't matter. Cam T says uptick in trolls of late. Of course, the more people that show up, the more popular the channel becomes, the more trolls are going to be. That's why, once you get to a certain point, you need to go to the membership route just so you can occasionally have streams where you can keep all the trolls out. So now let's talk about freedom of speech. Let's talk about freedom of speech. Now, what was slightly annoying to me was that a few people behaved exactly as I predicted. And what I mean by that is I addressed an issue and I addressed the case made by one of its greatest champions, J.B. Burry, Oxford intellectual, one of my favorite editors, great historian, and a serious, dedicated advocate of free speech. And I think that most of you will agree that I conclusively tore apart his case for free speech. So what did some people promptly do? Well, it's just one man. It's just one man's argument. You have to make a positive case for the non-right of free speech. How does that make any sense? If you want to argue that free speech is a right, then you have to produce the argument, and I, as the person who doesn't believe in it, criticize that argument. I don't have to make a negative argument that something doesn't exist. Okay? So, as I promised, Burry was not so much making the definitive case for free speech. I didn't say he was making the definitive case for free speech. No, he did have a case for free speech. It was just wrong. It was just, it was a dialectic case for free speech. He also had rhetorical cases for it, but it was wrong. And I showed why it was wrong. I explained why it was wrong. So then we look at, so I said, okay, it doesn't matter. Pick your champion. Tell me whichever champion of free speech you want to name, and I will take down that case. So I picked one. And I picked one that I didn't know because I thought that would be more interesting for you guys. I already know how to go after Hobbes. I already know how to go after Locke. And and I noticed what I did was I did a search for best cases for free speech. Lewis, you're wrong. Lewis, you need to stop. I'm about to ban you because you always have some stupid comment on something. My criticism was you didn't comprehensively tear about his argument. It's a whole freaking book, Lewis. You expect me to actually cover the entire book? I covered the core of his argument. That is the core of his argument. It's not just the one part of his argument. That was the key part of his argument. Okay? If you're not smart enough to follow along, stop listening to this channel. Okay? I don't mind stupid questions. Okay? What I do not like is stupid criticism because it's wrong. You're wrong. You've been wrong every single time you've tried to criticize me. So if you can't up your game or learn to shut the hell up, I will ban you. Okay? You're interrupting the whole thing. You're offering distractions. If you can't come up with a decent argument, then shut the hell up. So we're going to go to, I went to a list. The Guardian made a list, and they listed the 20 most important elements or the most important aspects of the development of free speech over time. And it began, unsurprisingly, with Socrates. And then the second one it listed was the Magna Carta. And the third one that it listed was a piece called The Education of a Christian Prince by Erasmus. Now, I have read some Erasmus, and was a really intelligent guy. He was the leading intellectual in Europe at the time. And so I thought, okay, I haven't actually read The Education of a Christian Prince. Let's see what it is. Let's see what this argument is. And so, okay, that sounds good, Lewis. You come up with your argument, you email it to me, and I'll have a look at it. That will work a lot better than you kind of trying to do these little sniping critiques online. So just email me your case. I'll critique it in a Darkstream. So in 1516, Erasmus wrote The Education of a Christian Prince. And this is famous because it was the source of a phrase that the free speech advocates like to refer to a lot. In a free state, tongues too should be free. Okay, that sounds pretty good. That sounds pretty, free speech. He sounds like a good advocate of free speech. But when you actually read the whole thing, when you actually read the whole piece, you realize this is not a defense of free speech. The first, because he lays out the duties of a prince. This is basically similar to Machiavelli's the prince. The first duty of a good prince is to desire the best things possible. The second duty, to see by what means all things that are evil can be avoided or removed, and on the other hand, how good conditions can be gained, developed, and strengthened. Do you see the first problem? The second duty is to see by what means all things that are evil can be removed. This is not looking like, I read that and I'm thinking, this is not looking very free speech friendly to me. What then is fitting praise for a prince? If he has eyes to the back as well as to the front, as Homer says, I'm not going to abuse the French. That is, if he can look back on what has already happened and ahead to the future, thereby having the greatest knowledge possible, his wisdom will be used for the good of his country, not for himself. Well, that's actually reminiscent of one of the arguments that Bury admitted was an effective one against free speech. So again, we're seeing this trend that does not seem to be free speech friendly, despite the way that that original statement about tongues being free. Then he goes on to say, the great mass of people are swayed by false opinions and are no different from those in Plato's cave, who took the empty shadows as the real things. It is the part of a good prince to admire none of the things that the common people consider of great consequence, but to judge all things on their own merits as good or bad. So what does this mean? The prince is supposed to judge all things on their own merits as good or bad and remove the things that are evil. This is actually stating that the prince has a duty to suppress free speech, to not permit bad and evil speech. He goes on to say, therefore, the tutor should first see that his pupil loves and honors virtue as the finest quality of all, the most felicitous, the most fitting a prince, and that he loathes and shuns moral turpitude as the foulest and most terrible of things. So, do you think that he's going to permit speech that advocates moral turpitude? Of course not. Absolutely not. I didn't. Can we get rid? I don't know who Andy Mack is. Haven't seen paid. Oh, I see. Yeah, we'll get rid of him. We got a little gamma troll there. So then we next go on to the real character of the prince is revealed by his speech rather than by his dress. Every word that is dropped from the lips of the prince is scattered wide among the masses. He should exercise the greatest care to see that whatever he says bears the stamp of genuine worth. So they're saying that speech is important, and good speech is very important. Virtue is important. Virtue is a duty. Even the Emperor Hadrian, a pagan and not to be classed among the good princes, would never listen to a charge of lèse-majesté, and not even that cruel monster Nero gave much heed to secret accusation on that charge. There was another one who paid no attention at all to charges of this sort, and said, in a free country, tongues likewise should be free. Therefore, there are no crimes which a good prince will pardon more readily or more gladly than those which affect him alone. Okay, so that's what they're making this appeal to free speech on. That statement right there. But is he actually advocating free speech in general? No. He's saying that the prince should readily forgive crimes of speech that are directed against him. They're still crimes. Remember, there are no crimes which a good prince will pardon more readily or gladly than those which affect him alone. What he's saying there is that the king should be magnanimous. This is what C.S. Lewis described in A Horse and His Boy, when he says, the king must be the first in every attack and the last in every retreat. He must laugh louder over a scantier dinner than any man in the kingdom. It's not about free speech at all. It's about being magnanimous if you're the leader. Jesus described this you can see this same teaching in Jesus when he says, the first shall be last. Okay? And so it has nothing to do with free speech. And to show to demonstrate how ridiculous it is that it appeals, guess who said that? When he said, remember, Erasmus didn't write this himself. Erasmus was quoting someone. There was another one. He's referring to a leader. He's referring to a prince, a king. In a free country, tongues likewise should be free. I'll give you all a chance to guess who he's talking about. He is talking about a significant ancient figure. Go ahead and guess. Guess what figure actually produced this statement that is considered to be the third important development in free speech by The Guardian. Go ahead. Take your guesses. I'm certain that no one is going to get it off the top of their head. Don't look it up on Google or whatever. Just take your best guess because it will amuse you. I guarantee you. Socrates is a good guess, but no. It's not Pericles. That's also a good guess. It was not Nero. That's closer, though. Oh, hey, Nick. We have greatness in the house. Nick Cole is here. It wasn't Nero. It wasn't Stalin. This was written in 1519. Jordan Peterson, clearly. Plato. Plato's actually a pretty good guess if you've read The Republic. Alexander, no. This is the funniest part. It's the Emperor Tiberius. Tiberius is one of the Roman emperors who was one of the least liberal Roman emperors out there. Okay? It was actually, Suetonius records Tiberius saying this. I actually laughed out loud when I saw that it was Tiberius. In a free country, tongues likewise should be free. This is somewhat akin to saying something positive about the Jews and arguing that this is making a good case for the Jews and then having it revealed that it was Adolf Hitler. That's the level of nonsense that we're talking about. Commodus was a very good guess. Okay, so the third significant argument for the freedom of speech is a quote from the Emperor Tiberius, quoted in a 16th century paper by Erasmus that specifically recommends that the prince not permit freedom of speech. That's what this boils down to. In fact, it even says that certain arts are not countenanced by the laws on the ground that they are too closely allied to imposture and are too frequently practiced by deceit. For example, astrology and the so-called alchemy, even if someone happens to be employing them for an honorable purpose. Okay, so you're not allowed to practice certain arts because they're too closely allied to imposture and too frequently practiced by deceit. Do you think that that is a philosophy that defends or is in line with freedom of speech in any way, shape, or form? So there you go. You wanted another case against another champion of free speech? Would you agree that this sufficiently demonstrates that the education of a Christian prince does not provide a compelling case for freedom of speech? So now we've taken down Bury. We've taken down Erasmus. How many more of these various philosophers do you need to see completely destroyed before you admit that there is no legitimate case to claim a right of free speech? Oh, that's a good point. Tiberius bumped off a bunch of senators for bad-mouthing him. So, Dave says, so far the freedom of speech arguments have been because it's convenient or through word salad. Exactly. James Erickson says, can you steelman the free speech case, argue the opposite? Of course I can. I haven't put together a conclusive case yet, but I am confident that I can, simply because if there wasn't a solid negative case to be made, the positive cases wouldn't be so weak. But what I am trying to tell you is that I have no obligation to do it. You are the ones that are claiming that there's a right to free speech. And I am saying, on what basis? And people say, well, Hobbes, Locke, Erasmus. They can't do it. And one thing that I've noticed is that when you look at the arguments for free speech, they are almost entirely rhetorical. Constantine says it's an emotional pull, that's why people fall for it. That's right. That's right. Foxwolf Bear says, prove me wrong until you get tired of it, because if you quit, I win in the end. That's such a gamma philosophy. That's probably why I resist permitting it or playing along with it. Paul Swigert says that the founders were not close at all. The founders didn't make any case for free speech whatsoever. All they said is that we shouldn't let the federal government pass a law about it. That's it. That is not at all what is understood as the right of free speech. That has nothing to do with freedom of conscience. That's just a practical government policy. And so, you need to learn to be specific. You need to learn to Spider says, why did the founding fathers want to do it? They didn't want to do it. They didn't do it. They just said that we don't want the federal government messing with that kind of stuff, because they didn't want people fighting wars over. Remember, these were very educated men. They were familiar with the filioque debate in the Eastern Roman Empire, the famous battles between the blues and the greens, and the controversy over the nature of the divine nature of Christ. And so they didn't want the federal government getting involved in those discussions. That's a practical point. That has nothing to do with the idea of a right to free speech. And that should be obvious, because governments generally don't base things on philosophy. Reprehensible Bear says, Vox, all I'm hearing from the critiques is basically, don't tell me what I can or can't say, meanie. There is a fair amount of that, yes. Mr. Jones says, people need to learn to articulate exactly what they mean. Well, they do, but again, that gets back to the point about the dumbing down. It astonishes me how many people here, and look, I understand that everybody here almost certainly has an above average IQ. Almost everybody here is generally considered smart. You would not be showing up to pay attention to let me ramble on about a 16th century medieval intellectual if you were not considerably more intelligent than the average. So and yet, look at the critiques and the arguments and so forth that a lot of people are producing. They're terrible. They're absolutely terrible. So if even the intelligent people are this dumbed down and this unfamiliar with the arguments that are the basis for the things they believe. I mean, this is a condemnation of our dis-civic, dis-civilizational society. Carolina Swamp Fox Bear says, you wouldn't consider free speech a negative right. No, I wouldn't. It's not a right at all. So Sammy Haas says, oof. No, it's not, I'm not criticizing you any more than I'm criticizing me. We are where we are. You know, all we can do is try to do better. What I'm trying to encourage you to do here, whether it's Lewis, whether it's some of the people who have been banned, whether it's some of the people who are just sitting there quietly nodding along, what I'm trying to encourage you to do is to think more clearly. Think about why you believe what you believe. As I've said, it doesn't matter how smart you are if you've never thought about it. If you're just regurgitating something that somebody told you when you were in grade school or in college or whenever it was, if you're just regurgitating what you were told, if your thought processes haven't kicked in, then you're behaving in a functionally stupid manner. I've done it. Everybody's done it. You know, we all make stupid mistakes because we don't engage our cognitive capacities on the subject at hand. You know, I mean, we were talking about we were talking about this Indiegogo situation, which I can't talk about specifically, but you know, we couldn't believe that all of us missed something basic. I mean, very basic, very important, and literally right in front of our eyes. We all missed it. And I finally, I mean, our guys are good enough that they had actually imputed essentially the same thing. But it wasn't until I went back and just started going over everything with a fine-tooth comb, regardless of whether it seemed relevant or not, that I found something that was just like boom, 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 black and white. It's all done. This is it. And we're all like, how did we miss this? It was because our assumptions were that the section that it was in would not have anything of relevance. None of us actually looked at it in detail with justification. You wouldn't have thought that there would be anything useful in there. Fox Wolf Bear says, if freedom of speech is not a right, what can one use to justify experimental or controversial ideas? Well, the customary one has been, well, it's necessary for science and progress. Well, we're finding out that that hasn't worked out too well. What we're finding out is that the whole thing was always a anti-Christian weapon. That's what free speech is. That's what it was. It was all designed to attack blasphemy laws so that subversives would have room to operate. That's the purpose of free speech. Local Enterprise says, Vox, love what you do. I'm a new fan. Couldn't the infant mortality rate have something to do with it? Couldn't more dumb genes be surviving and replicating? Well, that is part of it too. I expect that is probably part of it too. But I think yes, that is part of it too. And I would think that we could include that as a fourth reason. Good point. Cowboy Bear says, in this world, you need free speech in order to grow your faith through opposition and choose to fear Jehovah out of love. He allows Satan to do this to set a precedence of his sovereignty. That isn't true at all. God is not a fan of free speech. God is the one who tells us not to blaspheme. He's the one who says, do not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. That is not a free speech advocate. Also, he hates liars. Again, not a free... If you're a free speech advocate, you have to defend lying. You have to defend falsehood. That's part of it. Unseen 11 says, hey, Vox, is the separation of church and state along this same line of thinking, i.e. the state can't punish people for blasphemy because of free speech? Yes, it has become that. The original separation of church and state was just that they wanted to keep the church or the state out of the church's business. That whole process has been completely flipped around. It's been inverted, and that's how you know it's evil. We've talked about this before. How do you recognize evil? Inversion. They call good evil, and they call evil good. Whenever you see inversion, then you know that there is evil wizardry about. Vox, what's the path to a real education after decades of state-sponsored brainwashing? Read the great literature. Start with the easy stuff. Start with the C.S. Lewis's. Start with the Chestertons. Start with the that couple that did the histories, and then get into the real stuff. Get into read about Alexander, read about Napoleon, read about Julius Caesar. If you want to start with the kiddie stuff, there's a great library. What is it? I'll post it later, but there's this great children's library, and you will get a better education from just reading those 12 books than from spending 12 years in a public or private school. I mean, that's where I first came across, the 300 and Thermopylae and, Greek mythology and Roman history and all that stuff. Bulfinch's mythology isn't bad. If you believe in free speech, you have to support lying under oath. How can you possibly condemn lying under oath if you have a right to speak freely? Do you have a reading list? I've got several. If you go to the Castalia Direct bookstore, I've got lists of best science fiction, best fantasy, best history, best literature. John C. Wright has a post up with a ton of links to the great books. John C. Wright is a good guide for that kind of stuff too. He's a great writer as well. I don't remember the name of the series. I'll have to look it up. It's a kids library. It's a classic kids library. I highly recommend, finding a used set. So anyhow, well, a couple announcements real quick before I go. Number one, A Throne of Bones, the 31-hour, 25-minute audiobook, is now available on Audible as well as at the Archaven store. Obviously, we prefer it if you buy it from us directly, but if you already have a Audible subscription, you might want to spend it on A Throne of Bones. Let's see. Carolina Swamp Fox Bear says, wouldn't the fact that we have free will from God make it so? No. I mean, he gives us the option to choose, I can curse him or love him. That doesn't make it a right. You don't seem to understand what a right is. A right means that you should not be punished for doing that. You have a right to defend yourself, which means you can defend yourself and you will not be punished if you happen to do something that you would be otherwise punished for. So the fact that you have the ability to do something does not mean that you have permission to do something, that you have the right to do something. So a number of folks have confused that issue, and I don't really understand how it's confusing. The ability to do something is not the right to do it. God said, thou shalt not kill. This doesn't mean no laws against murder. Same applies to blasphemy. Yeah, that is true. I had to think through the analogy to make sure. Anyhow, well, thank you so much. Remember, Alt Hero number 6 is out. It's on the Archaven store. Chuck Dixon's Avalon number 3 is in print. It's on the Castalia Direct store. And A Throne of Bones is on Audible. Check any of them out if you're interested. We'll all look forward to Lewis's case for free speech, I'm sure. And I look forward to seeing you at the next Darkstream. I'm Vox Day. This is the Darkstream.